Welcome to broadcast number 27. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel. This is part 2 of the one about Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Q&A. You may recall that last week we handled the question about if Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune has no form or no style, how did he practice it? Did he practice random stuff? As well as why isn't Jeet Kune more widely practiced? So if you haven't seen that episode, hi Kenny, thanks for tuning in. I know it's early in the morning. As a matter of fact, it's so early in the morning, I'm still on my first cup of coffee. All right, that's how early it is here in Miami. So if you haven't seen broadcast number 26, the first Q&A, Jeet Kune Q&A, it's on the I Love Jeet Kune page, right, in the video section. So you might want to go take a look at that episode. Today we're going to handle 2 more questions, right? The first one is the way Jeet Kune, and I'm actually saying this the way that they were written, okay? The way Jeet Kune evolved under Dan Inosanto, is that what Bruce Lee would have wanted? That's question 1. And then question number 2 is, what are some ways to apply the Jeet Kune philosophy outside of martial arts? So we'll take a look at those 2 today. So let's get started with that. So the way Jeet Kune evolved under Dan Inosanto, is that what Bruce Lee would have wanted? So let's start this discussion with a look at how Jeet Kune is believed to have evolved under Sifu Dan, and what it is that his detractors have to say about him. And then we'll flip it around and we'll take an opposite view, and we'll look at what the people who praise and admire and follow Inosanto have to say, right? So the first thing is that you'll hear people say that by adding all these different arts, so Dan Inosanto is as much known for Jeet Kune as he's known for Filipino Kali, for Indonesian Pencak Silat, for Muay Thai, to a lesser degree probably for Boxe Francaise-Savate, for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's known as a Machado black belt. On the current seminar tour, he's showing stuff from Cambodian kickboxing, right? So all these things. So Dan Inosanto is, as I believe it was the late Victor de Tours referred to Dan Inosanto as the missing link when it came to martial arts, right? Okay. Oh, my friend Jenny is telling me I didn't do the T-shirt thing. So here we go. This is today's rendition. Okay, there we go. Enough of that. Thank you, Jenny. Right. So Dan Inosanto is as well known for these diverse number of arts as he is for Jeet Kune. So there are people who think that by, like I said earlier, adding these things, he was moving further and further away from Bruce Lee. But we have to kind of backtrack and ask ourselves, how did Bruce Lee get to the point that he got to, right? We all know that in the beginning stages, his intention was to create a fighting system that was made up of boxing, fencing, and Wing Chun, right? You can read about that right here in Jeet Kune, the commentaries on the martial way, right? So we know that, and we know that there is the story that after the fight with Wang Jackman, he kind of realized that his insistence on the application of Wing Chun technique wasn't the best way to deal and counter with Wang's, I think Wang trained in, what's it called, Mahjong Lohan or something, right? So, you know, since a lot of people weren't there and they do not know about Bruce Lee's research into other arts, they kind of remain unaware of this part of his process, right? It's almost as if they believe that from day one, Bruce Lee was just good and he never went through a development period, which is ridiculous, because if you look in the Tao of Jeet Kune, if you look in that Jeet Kune book that I just showed you, if you look in the Art of Expressing the Human Body, you can see that Bruce Lee was the ultimate martial art researcher. So there was, he was looking at other things. He was, as we would say, absorbing what was useful from the things that he came across. So this is how, I mean, even with the fencing and the boxing, right? Even with the Wing Chun, because we know that Bruce Lee trained in Wing Chun for a comparatively short period of time, right? Before he left Hong Kong and came to the US. And so a lot of his subsequent development was a lot of on his own, right? So, in looking at other things, Dan Inosanto is not at all violating any kind of Jeet Kune Do rule, because the founder of Jeet Kune Do also did look at other things, right? So in my opinion then, obviously, and everybody knew this before I answered it, right? Because I've been Dan Inosanto's student since 1983, so of course I'm biased, right, in his direction. So yes, in my opinion, most definitely, the way that Jeet Kune Do evolved under Dan Inosanto is what Bruce Lee would have wanted. And here's why. So my understanding is that when Bruce Lee said, you know, close the Chinatown school, I've said this many times before, take the most dedicated people to your backyard and train them there, right? That he said, and whatever way you want to bring out the art is fine with me. Now, and you know, I like to, my senior Cass Magda said that whenever possible, I should show my source material. So Jeet Kune Do Kickboxing by Chris Kent and Tim Tackett, on page 10, right at the top, it says in 1970, which I imagine refers to the backyard era. In 1970, Dan Inosanto greatly influenced the curriculum by adding Filipino boxing. There were two reasons for the addition. First, it added more sophistication to the Western boxing. And secondly, it added the ability to drill realistically and combatively without each student bashing the other's face in every workout, right? You dig that? It added a sophistication, an ability to drill realistically. Now, among those of you watching, anybody who trains in martial art, is not the ability to drill realistically of paramount importance in your development as a martial artist? Of course it is. So by adding the Filipino boxing to the curriculum in 1970, to the Jeet Kune Do curriculum, the Jeet Kune Do approach in 1970, Dan Inosanto did something that allowed future generations of students to be able to drill realistically, right? So I'll read just a little bit more of that paragraph. It said the Filipino training methods were developed from their stick fighting methods to allow a student to survive in training, right? So if you know anything about the Filipino stick fighting, right, you know, you got to be careful of what you're doing because you can mess yourself up pretty quickly, right? So that's Jeet Kune Do kickboxing. So that's one of the ways in which Jeet Kune Do evolved under Dan Inosanto, the addition of the sophistication of Filipino martial art drilling, right? Then to stay with that for a second, this idea of being able to drill realistically, right? I think that that's where ultimately what we call sparring drills would have originated. And to me, this is a major development because when I was coming up in the classical martial arts, in the Shotokan and the Taekwondo and what have you, we had the three-step sparring, right? And then you graduated from the three-step sparring into the one-step sparring, right? And then ultimately into the free sparring, right? The thing is that for me, the three-step and the one-step sparring didn't do anything at all to prepare you for the free sparring, right? And you know, and sometimes hard sparring, you introduce that too early to the students, they're not going to benefit from it, right? The naturally aggressive people will beat up on the not so naturally aggressive people. So you want to have a structured, progressive approach to what it is that you're doing when it comes to the sparring. So I have found personally that the addition of what we call in Kali the Pangamut or the Panantukan drills, right? Then I see a similar approach to what in Muay Thai, Ajahn Chai calls the Len Chun or the timing drills. I also see it in Boxe Francaise-Savate, a thing called Tem Assault, right? Where there is the fixed approach to the sparring, and then there is the free approach to the sparring. But the thing about it, 1-step and 3-step sparring in the classical art is a fixed approach, but it's not live. You see, there's not a whole emphasis on being in motion, in constant motion, like there is when you apply the 5 rules of Boxe Francaise training, for example. See, and this is the thing. In Boxe Francaise, let me see if I can remember the 5 rules, right? It's respect the range. So that means kick when you're at kicking range, punch when you're at punching range. There is stay in motion, so you're never flat on your feet, immobile, right? There is use full extension of the limb, so that's a recommendation or a requirement to use proper form, right? There is go for the touch, so that means that you're not kicking and punching the air, right? And then number 5 is use control. So just like it said in Chris Kent and Tim Tackett's book, it's not about bashing each other's heads in during the training session, because we're using control of the power and what have you, right? So all of these things, for me, came from Dan Inosanto's initial influence, right? Now, I don't know if Ajahn Chai put the Len Chun stuff together because of an Inosanto influence. I don't know if Salem Astley developed the Asol drills because of a Dan Inosanto influence. But for my own experience, I see the connection between those approaches, right? You'll always hear everyone talking about how Jeet Kune is about using what works for you. So my question is, how in heaven's name do you discover what works for you unless you have a structured approach to your analysis, your research, and your development? You cannot just wake up one morning and you have discovered what works for you. You got to put the work in. You got to do the drills. You have to do the training. That means you have to have a structured approach to your training. And anybody who believes that Jeet Kune Do does not have structured approach, then I recommend that they get their hands on this book, right? The Art of Expressing the Human Body, right? And take a look at the section where we get a peek into Bruce Lee's day timer, right? Here's some other things. So a lot of this I remember getting it in discussion with my senior Cass Magda, right? And I'm fairly sure that he would have gotten it from Sifu Inosanto. So there is the training concept where we just talked about the 5 rules of in Boxe Francaise, right? So there's a thing in the Filipino Kali, which of course is not limited or restricted to application in weaponry only, but it is the idea of changing, dig these 4, the timing, the placement, the angle, and then the tool or the weapon, right? So in other words, let's say the tool is the jab, just for simplicity's sake, right? So the jab, if we change the timing of it, right, the jab could come before your opponent's attack, it could come during your opponent's attack, or it could come after your opponent's attack. The jab, if we change the placement, the jab could go to the head, but the jab could go to the body. If we change the angle of the jab, then it becomes, instead of simple or single direct attack, if I angle if I'm in right lead and I angle off to the right or the left and then hit the jab, I've now made it a single angular or angulated attack, but it's still the jab. And then the tool or the weapon, what if it's not the jab with the hand, it's the foot jab that we discover in Muay Thai? You see? So it's all still jabbing, so to speak, but look at what it is that we've done. By incorporating a training element that may have come out of somewhere else, we have now enabled ourselves to indulge in finding out what works for us, right? So that's the concept of changing timing, placement, angle, and then tool or weapon. Another idea is the idea of having a prefix, a root, and a suffix. So let's limit this discussion to kickboxing. So my root motion might be cross, hook, cross. That might be my root technique. I can prefix that with the aforementioned jab. So now I have built myself a jab as entry and then cross, hook, cross as follow-up. And now maybe I go double lead leg hook kick, right, as finish. So what I have is the jab as prefix, cross, hook, cross as root, and then the suffix is the double lead leg hook kick. So I have what is that? That's a six hit combination, right? Okay, but that now all you have to do is work with the idea of changing the prefix. So now maybe the prefix is not a punch, the prefix itself is a kick. We keep the root the same, and then maybe we change the suffix. So now the suffix might not be kicking again, or it could be, it might be punching again. In any case, what we're doing is finding out, investigating what works for us, because we have a guiding principle. And that principle was the idea of delving with changes of prefix, root, and suffix, right? So all of these two, I found, can lead you to become incredibly creative in your technical development. Another small one, right, that we have is the idea of the reference point, right? And so the most popular reference point is, of course, what we call in Junfan, the high outside reference point. So that's the two wrists crossed over deal that everybody knows from the fight scene with O'Hara, with Bob Wall in Enter the Dragon, right? Where they touch wrists and then, you know, Bruce Lee demolishes him from there on, right? So that's what we call the high outside reference point, right? So again, using, for me, that the Kali idea, you have a high outside reference point. Now you just switch things around. That means you can have a low outside reference point. You switch things again, you can have a high inside reference point. You switch things again, you can have a low inside reference point. Oh, and you want to know how you can change that again? You switch leads. He goes right lead, you go left lead, right? Then you both go left lead, then you both go right lead, then he goes left lead, you go right lead, whatever it is, but you get what I'm talking about, right? That's how you can continue to investigate what works for you. And that's how you can indulge in what we call the daily decrease, right? Because you're using certain guidelines and certain principles to structure your training, and that's how you get to whittle away at what works and what does not work, right? So that's the idea of a reference point. But generally speaking, a reference point is any time that there is bridge contact between you and the opponent, which means there can be hundreds of reference points, right? Okay, so that is some of the ways that Jeet Kune Do evolved, the training of Jeet Kune Do evolved under Dan Inosanto, right? Like I said, for me, that dissemination of information came at his hands, and then at the hands also of Cass Magda and Chris Kent to a certain degree, right? So that's why it falls for me under the idea of Dan Inosanto's evolution of Jeet Kune Do, right? So the second one is, what are some ways to apply the Jeet Kune Do philosophy outside of martial arts? So that word is in there again, right? Philosophy. So of course, if you're going to talk about the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, what do you have to look at? You got to look at this book, right? So, and for some reason, I've noticed that Facebook, when it uses a snapshot for this broadcast, it always seems to end up taking a picture of me with the Jeet Kune Do philosophy book, right? So first off, what are the Jeet Kune Do philosophies? Well, what's the definition of philosophy in the first place, right? Essentially, so I'll give you some dictionary definitions, right? The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. Let me read that again. The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. I don't know about you, sounds like Jeet Kune Do to me, right? And then there's a sub-definition, which is a particular system of philosophical thought, right? It is that idea of a system of thought. That's the aspect that interests me a lot when it comes to Jeet Kune Do. And I had this kind of tangential thought. If we look at this for a moment from the Judeo-Christian approach, we know that there's a thing called the Ten Commandments. They're very, very famous, right? But the Talmud, right, the Hebrew Talmud notes that when you combine the 611 commandments from Moses with the 2 commandments that were the ones that were heard directly from God, then it adds up to like 613 commandments, right? But the 10 are the best known. It's kind of like Michael Jackson is the most famous of the Jackson 5, right? But Jackie Jackson was a pretty good talent himself, right? Right? Okay, that's just crazy. Anyhow, so if we go through the reason why I tell you that is because if we go through the pages of Bruce Lee's notes, what we can come up with is a ton of systems of philosophical thought, right? A ton of Jeet Kune Do philosophies, but there are some of them which are more famous than the others. And I always like to make fun that the most famous one is Be Water, my friend, right? Okay, all right. So page 68 of the Jeet Kune Do Art and Philosophy. This is where it's the explanation of the yin yang symbol, right? And there's a lot of it that it says here, but essentially what it is that's taught by that is that yin and yang are not opposites. They are instead the complementary halves of a complete whole. And I think that that's a philosophy that's so evident in life, right? We you know, if we think of let's do this, right? So okay, so if we think that there's a thing called adult and then there's a thing called child, right? So in order to have a family, you need those two which can appear to be opposing entities, right? But in order to construct a thing called family, you need adults and you need children, right? Again, if we look at that, you need male and female, so they're not opposites; they're complementary halves, right? You need hard and soft in your kung fu, right? In order to be well developed. If you're hard style, that only takes you so far. If you're soft style, that only takes you so far. It is the blend of hard and soft. It's almost like saying it's an understanding. You know, there's this thing, somebody asked me about Bruce Lee and cultural appropriation the other day. And I said, well, look, you can find pictures of Bruce Lee dressed in, Chinese clothing. And you could find pictures of Bruce Lee dressed in Western clothing, right? So it's like, it's the opening up of the East to the West, and it's the opening up of the West to the East. This is how we can have more global understanding of things, right? I mean, come on, it's ridiculous, right? This idea that things are actually opposite. No, they're not opposing forces. They are complementary forces, right? I couldn't find a printed reference of this, but I know it is in the Pierre Berthold interview, where Bruce Lee says that ultimately all knowledge is self-knowledge. So I wanted to expand on that a little bit, right? Ultimately, all knowledge is self-knowledge. So it's page 20 of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, right? Old version. I'm not sure if it's page 20 in the new version. And here's what I noted. Let's see. To know oneself is to study oneself in action with another person. Right? Let me read it again. To know oneself is to study oneself in action with another person. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but that's a thing called relationship, right? The study of oneself in action with another person. That's called relationship, you see? And so then on page 94, he says, let me find it again. No, it's not the Tao. I got to learn to read my own notes, right? It's page 94 of the Art and Philosophy book. Hang on, right? It says, the understanding of Jeet Kune Do is through personal feeling from moment to moment in the mirror of relationship, and not through a process of isolation. To be is to be related. To isolate is death, right? That's a little bit long, but let me read it to you again. The understanding of Jeet Kune Do is through personal feeling from moment to moment in the mirror of relationship, and not through a process of isolation. To be is to be related. To isolate is death. So it goes right back to what he was saying again about the study of oneself has to be in relation to another person. So I've always told people that a lot of times our interpersonal relationships are there to teach us more about ourselves, about what our standards are, about what we look for, what we will accept into our lives, what we will reject from our lives. And the way you find that out is not by being isolated, but it's by being in relation with other people. All right. Okay. So then the last one, this comes from a section of Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate, which was the 19. Shoot, I'm going to mess this up. Was that written in 1964, 68? Anyhow, but there's a section where Bruce Lee asked the rhetorical question, right? How often are we told by different sensei that the martial arts are life itself? But how many of them truly understand what they are saying? Life is a constant movement, rhythmic as well as random, right? So, find yourself. You can find it on Chris Kent's website. He's got a reprint of the Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate. We talked about it a couple broadcasts ago. You can find that video too. But yeah, I wanted to spend a little bit of time in that. Obviously, if we're talking about Jeet Kune Do philosophies, we can do that probably for a full year, right? Take one statement every day from the books, and we could talk about that stuff every day for a year, right? But I think that in the end, you can see that Bruce Lee put an emphasis on the understanding of self is the endless pursuit, right? And that pursuit can only be engaged in when one is free. So that's why there's a lot of talk about self-development and freedom in Jeet Kune Do. And part of that freedom is freedom from self-doubt, right? It's about developing yourself and gaining the confidence and the knowledge in order to go forward with your desires. So it's freedom from self-doubt, as well as the freedom to be and to do in society, right? And that's why I sometimes say that Jeet Kune Do is as much an experiment in democracy as is the experiment that is the United States of America. Right? Okay, so that's it for today, right? Thanks, guys, for as usual for tuning in. Sorry about having to reschedule till 11 o'clock this morning, but I was traveling yesterday and I didn't get back in time, right? But next week we'll be back regular time, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Until then, this is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off. You guys enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.